Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here today. We have our monthly webinar, and we will talk about Advocacy Basics. Our speaker today is Siobhan Dilly, BPW New Zealand Vice President Issues, which is Advocacy, in her second term. She has previously served as National Issues Taskforce Chair, Young BPW Representative, and Executive Secretary. She has been a member of the Wellington Club New Zealand Capital for 7 years. At the club level, she served as the secretary. Professionally, Siobhan is an executive officer for a nonprofit organization. Thank you, Siobhan, for accept to be our speaker. The floor is yours.
Hello and good morning from New Zealand, where it's just past midnight. I'm just going to share my screen. And is the presentation coming up okay for everyone? Okay, awesome. All right. First of all, greetings, BPW sisters. I'm Siobhan Dilly, Vice President Issues, BPW New Zealand, and I'm so pleased to present to you on Advocacy in Action, Advocacy Basics, how to design and run an advocacy program. I want to start with a big thank you to Yasmin and Anne and all of those involved in preparing these wonderful seminars. They're a fantastic resource for members, and it is humbling to have been invited to share our New Zealand experience of advocacy. All right, just make sure that we can flip through. To run through the agenda for this presentation, I'm going to start by exploring the heart of advocacy and then talk about what it looks like locally, nationally and globally, with a bit more detail on the national piece of advocacy, where the meat of the work we do in New Zealand sits. I'll give an example of our BPW Wellington campaign on the gender pay gap at retirement, and I'll cover some suggestions about how to get advocacy efforts underway. And that should leave us with time for some Q&A, questions and answers. So my hope for this presentation is that by sharing BPW New Zealand's example, you feel more equipped and inspired to undertake advocacy action and become change makers yourselves, whether as individuals or groups. For those already undertaking work in this space, this presentation may give you ideas on new approaches or to refine your work. BPW gives us this great opportunity to collaborate, share good practice and support one another and hopefully uplift and enrich our work. Advocacy is raising awareness and making recommendations for action on an issue or matter. This can be as an individual or a group at the local, regional, state or global level. And it's really important because it influences policy making and it affects change. Our BPW founder, Lena Madison Phillips, captures this so well in her quote. "Never doubt that a group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." It can bring together parties to advance a matter by raising awareness and sharing experiences and expertise. It can show people that we mean business, particularly when working collaboratively. It's how we establish our credibility. One of my favourite quotes from New Zealand suffragette Kate Shepherd is, "Do not think your single vote does not matter much. The rain that refreshes the parched ground is made up of single drops." I reflect on this quote quite a lot in my BPW and advocacy work, not just obviously about voting and suffrage, but about the power of a group working collaboratively and having a voice together. Why am I so involved in advocacy work? Why do I volunteer my time in this role? So about 8 years ago, I returned to New Zealand after living in the US for much of my late 20s and early 30s. I wanted to meet and engage with like-minded women who were passionate about their work and interests, about gender equality and about contributing to a better world for all women. So I Googled women's group and up popped BPW New Zealand. It was only a few meetings in that BPW Vice President Issues of the time, who's Helen Swales, suggested that I take on the role of Issues Taskforce Chair. And I'm going to talk more later in this presentation about the Issues Taskforce and what's involved in that. And so Helen appoints me to the Issues Taskforce Chair, and then basically it's all go from there. I'm a passionate and opinionated woman, which is a great way to end up in a leadership role in BPW New Zealand. Thanks to Helen and then National President Vicky Mee and current President Christine Berridge. And Christine, it's just simply awesome to have you here. And a number of other remarkable BPW New Zealand women who've been mentors and supporters. I took up positions on the National Executive and am now in my second year as Vice President Issues, as Yasmin highlighted. I have seen how advocacy efforts by BPW New Zealand puts an idea in front of policymakers, contributes to the drafting of legislation, holds our government to account, and raises wider awareness of an issue through media interest. So I'm hooked basically on this advocacy gig, and I'm really lucky to be sharing about it with you. Effective advocacy at the local level for a BPW club starts with an idea, an issue or a matter that you or your club are passionate about addressing, about seeing change on. For BPW Wellington, our meetings are an opportunity to brainstorm and discuss ideas that members bring along. Starting with that idea, that seed, we water it and offer it sunlight through research, discussion, hearing or reading from experts on it, and that gives that seed an opportunity to sprout and flourish. We then agree as a club on an approach, on what we will say about it, what our stance is. To bring the idea to flower in Wellington, we have held events, and at these events, we have invited experts in the field to speak on a panel, for example. We've invited a broad audience, BPW members and beyond, and we've invited media to attend. We issue media statements to promote our efforts and draw more people to engage on this matter. A media strategy can help put the matter front and centre with policymakers. So after events, after these media efforts, we now have an idea, an issue that is a fully fledged plan. And we as a club submit a resolution to our BPW New Zealand AGM. Here's a photo of delegates voting at our 2022, this year, annual general meeting in Gisborne this past May. And it was fantastic to be able to have this AGM in person, considering the impact that we've had from lockdowns over the past few years. You can see in that photo in the middle, you can see Anita Defsuch and Carolyn Savage, past presidents, and then sort of at the back in the centre, you can see Vicky Mee as well. So a couple of faces some of you might recognise. Our BPW New Zealand advocacy work is underpinned by a policy document. And this does lead on from local club work and our AGM. This document, it's over 75 pages at the moment, lists all current and historical policy agreed at our AGMs. For advocacy, our external policy in this document guides us in what we speak to publicly. External policy topics include education, justice, healthcare, the status of women, a raft of different policies on different matters. So it guides us in what we speak to publicly, because by referencing our policy, we know we are speaking with the voice of our members through their voting at our AGM. Of note, also in this document, is our internal policy, which includes our commitment to different UN treaties and bodies, including the Sustainable Development Goals and the UN Global Compact. Affiliations with other groups like National Council of Women, New Zealand Federation of Multicultural Councils, and Pacific Women's Watch is also captured in our internal policy in this document. And so these are concepts or commitments that feed into what we advocate around. So a local club is going to come up with a resolution it gets put forward to our AGM, it ends up in our New Zealand policy document. But I think we can expand on that process a little bit more, in a little bit more of a practical way. Resolutions to policy. How does this happen? Here's a resolution I've put here as an example. Financial literacy. That the New Zealand Federation of Business and Professional Women, BPW New Zealand, Inc., urges Parliament and the Ministry of Education to implement a financial literacy program into the school curriculum as a mandatory subject for all students from year 7 to year 13. This was a resolution drafted in 2016 by a club, submitted to our resolutions chair by the deadline, which is usually 1st of December for the coming year AGM, put on the floor at our 2017 AGM and passed into policy. Running through this process, club member submits a resolution, another club member seconds it, the resolutions are then compiled and sent out to all the clubs and members. They have the opportunity to review it, to decide together how they will vote, and then the resolution's tabled at the BPW New Zealand AGM. And throughout those steps, there's always edits happening to resolutions. They're always being honed, or the language is being perfected for advocacy work. At our AGM, if passed, they're voted in and become policy, and it guides our advocacy work. And then often one of the key actions is that resolutions may require a lobbying letter to a relevant minister or government body. From our AGM, resolutions are recommended for presenting to International Congress on an ongoing basis. If it is felt that a resolution is a good fit to become an international resolution, it is noted when the resolution comes to our national conference. The resolutions team then processes them when the call for resolutions to Congress comes and finds a supporting country to second the resolution. Right, so let's talk about our regional national advocacy. It's not dissimilar from our local work. Actually, I just want to note that I refer to regional national advocacy, but New Zealand's such a small country that we don't really have that regional level advocacy. But I do recognise there are many, many countries much, much bigger than New Zealand that have that government or bureaucracy at the regional level. But I'm sure these concepts and principles apply at both levels. So the bulk of our advocacy work, the nuts and bolts, is the first 3 items: letter writing, parliamentary submissions, and government consultation. Letter writing is a key kind of activity we undertake, because that is how we're communicating about our policy directly with ministers of parliament, and them being policymakers. So I mentioned that often an action item for a resolution at conference is a letter to Parliament. And so it is on the VP issues to get a letter drafted, which is something that we require our movers to do. Draft that letter, review it, edit it, and put it to the President for approval to send to the Minister of Parliament. Along with letter writing, parliamentary submissions is another key activity. The New Zealand parliamentary website has quite a sophisticated system of showing which legislation going through Parliament is currently up for public consultation. With our parliamentary submissions are usually, well, they're always a PDF letter form document. And I'm going to talk in a lot more detail about what we have in these submissions later in the presentation. So we submit our letter submission, PDF document, to Parliament via the online website. We upload the form and send it away. Parliamentary submissions start with written submissions, and you have the option to state whether you're happy to do a spoken or oral submission if they are seeking oral submissions. And we typically say, yes, we would be happy to speak to our submission in person. And so quite often we're doing oral submissions as well as written submissions on a piece of legislation. Government consultation is where different government organisations are inviting public input on a piece of policy they're developing. And this is another key piece of work that we undertake. So we are tracking the relevant ministry websites like Ministry of Health, Ministry of Justice, Ministry for Women, and also Department of Internal Affairs, Law Commission, Human Rights Commission, and Statistics New Zealand. And I raised the last one because it's a good example of a submission we've done recently is to Statistics New Zealand on the disability survey. They invited public input via their website. So basically you're looking for the section on their website where it's usually called Have Your Say, and they'll have a list of the items that they have open for submission. They'll have a link to how to submit, some details, and often they'll have some questions they'd like people to answer, some specific questions that they're seeking public input on. And the interesting thing about the disability survey is in New Zealand, it's a key way that we understand the state of accessibility and concerns for disabled people, the key statistical survey, but they're only conducting it every 10 years. And the treaty monitoring committees for the likes of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities wants up-to-date data. So our submission talked about how if you only have this very important survey every 10 years, we can't provide up-to-date data to the monitoring committee for the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. That was a key element of our submission, and please have a good sample size to make it quite statistically representative. And I just want to note past president and life member Diane Glenn, who were the brains behind that submission. Right, so that was a bit of a segue, and now I'm going to go back to my slide. We've got NGOs and allies, like National Council of Women, initiatives like the Women's Empowerment Principles, where we're creating connections with like-minded groups. National Council of Women invite consultation from all women's groups that are members into their submissions. And it provides another avenue for us to put a voice forward to policymakers. Reference groups and connections with members of Parliament, probably the key ministerial reference group we're involved in is called International Women's Caucus. That's a reference group run by the Ministry for Women, which consists of about 15 to 20 people in the women's advocacy spaces working for organisations like ours. And that's where the Ministry for Women can engage with the NGO sector about international treaty monitoring or women's advocacy international forums like the Commission on the Status of Women. And then connections with members of Parliament as we build up our credibility and become known to different members of Parliament, we might get invited by them to a working group that's discussing pieces of policy that are coming up or that are interested or concerned about. Treaty monitoring is something I touched on with the International Women's Caucus. So BPW has been involved in submissions for shadow and alternate reports to the Monitoring Committee for the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And my final point is media. Having that media strategy, like I said, is so important for lifting the profile of BPW, putting an issue out there and getting a broader awareness around it, and putting it front and centre in front of policymakers. So all of this work keeps us busy. It's underpinned, like I said, I talked a bit about our BPW New Zealand policy. That I mean, I'm probably going to say this like 6 times in this presentation. It's so important that we refer to our policy because that means that we are referring to the voice of our members. We also link into our international treaties and international fora, CEDAW, Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Sustainable Development Goals being some of the key ones. And then we link in and refer to the expertise and experiences of members and allies. What does that mean? It means when we have time with consultation with submissions, we go out to our members and clubs and say, what do you think about this issue? What's your experience of it? What would you like us to tell them? And that might mean on certain issues we can get more personal stories, which can be quite powerful in a submission. And I say when we get time because quite often Parliament or government bodies will give you 3 weeks to do a submission, and you can't really go back to a club because it's not in the cycle of a monthly club meeting. Or sometimes you can get 2 months, and that's fantastic because you can go back to a club, you can collate their input, weave it into your submission, and then send your submission away. So time is of the essence there, and we always encourage. We particularly talked to Ministry for Women about this recently, about giving all volunteer organisations like us time to consult with our members on things. Okay, so how does all this work happen? It happens because of the Issues Taskforce. This is the group that drives our national advocacy activity. It consists of a group of about 8 to 12 BPW members who meet monthly via video conference. Executive members and past presidents have a standing invite, and we try to get a representative from every club. It operates under the oversight of the Vice President Issues, reporting to the National Executive, who receive minutes of each meeting. The Executive also approve the Task Force terms of reference. So there's a clear structure about reporting, and the Task Force terms of reference documents the intention of the Task Force, the way it works, and the roles involved. The Task Force has an issues chair role to help organise meetings, track items for submission, chair the meetings, and I am fortunate to also have the support of a minute taker. I don't have an issues chair at the moment, so I'm really hoping that we can fill that vacancy too. The meeting looks at, so the Issues Task Force meetings, they look at upcoming items for submission. They decide what to prioritise and what approach to take. They review policy approved at our most recent AGM and ensure that it is followed up with, such as through lobbying letters. The Task Force tracks potential resolutions for our upcoming AGM. At the moment, those resolutions are looking to be one on modern slavery, one on early school leavers. Early school leavers is a big issue in New Zealand because of the impact of COVID, and also policy changes or policy challenges for women on welfare due to relationships affecting your welfare entitlement, or due to the abatement on your welfare income because of taking up paid work. So we then the Task Force is also looking at BPW policy for archiving, and also policy passed at the most recent BPW International Congress as it might apply in New Zealand. So we recently looked at the 2021 International Congress resolution that was passed, skills development for migrant women and recognition of their foreign credentials. We update and share about UN and BPW international work, and we are guided by an advocacy action plan for the term. So that puts a strategy in place and a work plan and gives us something to track how we're achieving. Cool. So what are some key approaches that underpin our advocacy work? Firstly, collaboration. We discuss ideas at the club level to share about what issues are concerning members Or if you have a really large club, you could even take it to a smaller group so you can really foster throwing ideas around, what is your issue? How can the government or society fix it? And then bring people together outside of your usual space to broaden horizons. Second, coordination, research, being prepared, doing your background work. This could really, probably the better C word for it would be credibility. Putting the time into the research and the background work is actually something I struggle with because of time constraints. Because when you unpacking an issue, sometimes you can go down quite a lot of rabbit holes and to quite a level of extent of research on it. However, well-informed advocacy work is far more credible and more useful to policymakers. Thirdly, cohesion. Ensure that BPW policy and the agreement of your club is underpinning your work to appropriately present the views of members. As Kate Shepherd teaches us, the voice of a group is more powerful than an individual alone. So here's where I want to offer some practical comments about our submissions. So we have a few key sort of approaches to submissions for all of them, whether it's a letter to a minister, a parliamentary submission, or a submission for a specific piece of consultation that a government body is doing. It ties us together in our consistency and displays a high level of professionalism. So our submission is in letter form. It's a PDF electronic letter submitted on letterhead. We start with proper titles, contact information for the person or organisation to whom we're writing, and making sure for Ministers of Parliament that we're using their correct title to write to, the Honourable Minister Little or so forth. We try to send them to a single person so that that individual is accountable for follow-up or response. We do certainly CC additional people relevant to the issue, other ministers, opposition party members with that issue in their portfolio, national associations, other NGOs, and so forth. We begin our submissions by explaining briefly and to the point what we are writing about and why we are interested in this issue. If it is a piece of legislation, we comment on whether we support it or not. And if we support it, we offer encouragement, but also any recommendations to strengthen it. If we don't support it, we might outline recommendations on what we would need to see to be able to offer our support, or explain constructively and with reasoned research statements why we simply cannot support it. We explain the basis of our submission as the voice of our members, outlines the specific policy our stance and our recommendations relate to. So I'm actually copying and pasting the policy from our policy document into our submission, so it's crystal clear. And then we also refer to any international treaties or initiatives like the Sustainable Development Goals that underpin our submission as well. So I'm then looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, the sub-goals, and incorporating them word for word in our submissions. We finished by outlining in about 3 paragraphs who BPW New Zealand is, our affiliation with BPW International, and through BPW International, our UN credentials. We are professional, we proofread our submissions, we try to make it clear, concise, and easy to read language. We try to avoid waffling on and duplication. And our submissions, we try to be as researched and reasoned as possible. This just all adds credibility. So I want to offer some thoughts on how BPW leadership in clubs and nationally can support clubs and members with advocacy. Firstly, by fostering a culture of caring about the well-being and empowerment of all women and girls. providing safe places. So leadership would be providing safe places for ideas to be raised and discussed. And leading by example can be really key here. These places for discussion allow members to explore and build on their interests and passions. I know, for example, that each and every New Zealand past president always offers support to our less experienced members in drafting resolutions for our AGM. Secondly, BPW leadership can support clubs and members by offering the tools that they need to engage in advocacy, like having an easy depository for policy documentation so they can access it digitally, letterhead as well, templates and examples, as well as connection to like-minded allies and groups that have expertise in an area, and access to BPW International and UN information. Thirdly, leadership consider putting in place a task force, working group or committee for advocacy, providing structure through terms of reference, and offering support by the presence and investment of executive members. I mention that because I don't think I've been involved in a webinar or a meeting for BPW in the last 2 years as VP issues without another member or multiple members of the executive there beside me. So we are truly, it's like a sisterhood. We're just out there supporting one another. I'm really pleased to touch on the topic of global advocacy, and I'm checking the time as I do that. Our BPW International Assemblies, where policy is adopted internationally, and it is also a fantastic event for federations and affiliates to network, collaborate, and come together in the joy of our work. BPW International has a long history of collaboration with the United Nations, having consultative status with the UN Economic and Social Council, the UN Central Forum for discussing international economic and social issues and formulating policy recommendations addressed to member states. This is an amazing plank, or just an incredible for our profile for BPW. And we always mention this in our submissions. And when we're doing research on issues, I'm going to many UN sources for research and policy recommendations, to the International Labour Organization, to the Human Rights Council, just a raft of places where I can find advice from the UN on matters. I think sister clubs and federations can support one another in bringing advocacy efforts global. Twinning is a great avenue for this. You can weave into your twinning agreement, whether it's advocacy generally or specific issues that you and your sister club might like to explore together, that this could be a really great way to advance advocacy work. Often, members of nearby clubs and federations of other countries will meet at regional meetings, or they might attend each other's AGMs of other federations, see what policy they're bringing in, discuss advocacy efforts. It's not quite the same when you're New Zealand and you're in the middle of the ocean at the bottom of the world, but we do our best to get out and about to events. And I'm really excited because as travel starts to open up for New Zealand, there's going to be untold opportunity through BPW International to connect on our advocacy efforts. We can't talk about global advocacy without talking about the Commission on the Status of Women. This is a United States event each March. It's an important forum where states form agreed conclusions, which is essentially a document with a series of statements on the state of women issues. However, NGOs are a significant part of this event, including BPW International and different BPW federations. This is a key forum for NGOs to share our member voice. There are over 10,000 people networking, collaborating, presenting, and striving for action for the empowerment of all women globally. These sort of international fora could be like one of these webinars all on their own. In fact, I see there is one about how to participate in the Commission of the Status of Women. So all of you need to watch that. And they could also be like, there are women, BPW women that are so far more experienced in this global advocacy space than me. So I'm actually going to leave it there and move along. I've now got an example of our advocacy work in action from my club, BPW Wellington. So in New Zealand, we have a pension scheme for retirees, and a key supplement to the scheme is a government-backed savings scheme, KiwiSaver, whereby people nominate a percentage of their income to go into a retirement savings scheme, which is required to be matched by the employer by at least 3%. Okay, that's awesome, because savings is good. You know, we want to set people up for economic independence and retirement. It's fantastic. But that, that supplement to the scheme is tied into personal income over our working life. And the gender pay gap and other factors mean women retire with less. Not so good. No, not cool at all. Okay, we've got to do something about this. So in 2017, BPW Wellington had identified this issue, and we agreed to take action, and we were tying it in with Equal Pay Day. Equal Pay Day, or in New Zealand we call it Red Bag Day, because you've got a red handbag because you're in the red, marks the period of extra days in the current year women need to work to achieve the same wages that men earned during the previous financial year. So in New Zealand, we have to work till mid-February to earn what men earned January to December. That's terrible, because I can't give up 2.5 months to earn the same as men. Like, we don't have time available to us like that. We need to do something about this. Equal Pay Day is marked in many countries around the world. A lot of you may well be familiar with Equal Pay Day and Red Bag Day. And the day varies in each country depending on the gender pay gap and where it is. So BPW Wellington organised a luncheon attended by around 20 local businesswomen and political representatives. And we had panel speakers who were the Retirement Commissioner, the President of the New Zealand Council of Trade Union, and a senior HR executive for a major bank. They shared their perspective on the gender pay gap and its impact at retirement. We then drafted a resolution for the BPW New Zealand conference, and we've got that on the screen there, gender pay gap at retirement. This was passed into policy in New Zealand, resulting in lobbying letters to government, and then it was put forward to the BPW International General Assembly in 2021. And we were really excited it was passed into policy for BPW International. This retirement perspective continues to be a plank for our advocacy on the gender pay gap. The gender pay gap persistently sits around 10% in New Zealand. We're going to be advocating this for a long time. But one example is the government is starting to finally seriously look at a pay transparency regime in New Zealand. So when they invite consultation, and also when we decide we want to write to them about the gender pay gap, we have very clear policy about providing this retirement perspective. So this example shows to you how a policy goes from a club, national to international. It's an example that for many gender equality issues, our advocacy efforts are going to continue through my lifetime and probably through my 3-year-old's lifetime as well. Plenty to do. We'll just keep going. So some thoughts on next steps. Action might be gather and discuss, come up with those issues that you identify are pressing for you or your club or women in your area locally. Agree as a club or as a group on your principles, approach and priorities. Document your discussions and what is agreed so that you can, it just confirms what you've agreed on, and it's something you can go back to check on later during the advocacy process. Maybe start with just writing a letter. That gets things out there. And in a previous slide, when I talk about the contents of submissions, well, you've got half the letter there. So I suggest if you're looking at really exploring advocacy, keep it simple, sisters. We are an all-volunteer organisation. We have commitments outside of BPW. Can you believe it? Jobs, families, so we need to set realistic expectations for ourselves and be kind to ourselves and one another. I've talked a bit about the different areas that we advocate on, and I've just got a list here as an example. The economic independence and empowerment, particularly the gender pay gap, and we're definitely getting very strong into advocating on the gender and ethnic pay gap, and also the pay gap for disabled people. Representation and leadership, women on boards, healthcare, justice, education, climate change, domestic and sexual violence, and many, many more areas. I would encourage groups to focus on policy or focus on the heart of advocacy, the issues. Try not to get bogged down in the process. Policy, not process. I'm going to just finally touch on something that always guides my BPW work, and that is our beautiful collect. So we have this wonderful legacy of women before us to lean on, and as our foundation people that inspire us. In New Zealand, we refer to our BPW collect in our work very often. It grounds us, it establishes the basic expectation of how we work and how we work together, and it is beautiful. It helps guide our advocacy work. So certain phrases may stand out for you, but for advocacy efforts, I appreciate the line, and may we strive to touch and know the great common human heart of us all. That idea of looking beyond us, caring about what is happening for all women and girls. That brings me to the end of my presentation. I just want to thank attendees and viewers for coming along on the ride. Thank you again, Yasmin, for your introduction, and Anne for the invite. I think we do have some time for questions, but I'll hand it over to the organisers.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. This is one of the most comprehensive presentations on this topic that I have ever seen. And I feel like it's a real manual for any club anywhere, that they have a step-by-step approach that they can take to building their advocacy program. We're going to open the floor now for anyone who has any questions or comments. But I will first ask Dr. Yasmin, our past international president and co-facilitator of this series, if you have any comments you'd like to make.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really, it was a wonderful presentation. And as I agree with Anne, is the most clear presentation about advocacy that I never heard. Thank you very much. I just want to ask you if New Zealand have a record or data about the impact of your resolutions presented to the government and in the civil arena.
Yasmin, I love that question, because it would be so powerful if we could, but such a difficult thing to do. What we'd probably be doing is looking at a specific matter that we've advocated on, like the gender pay gap, and seeing where progress is. But often we're advocating on matters that are so societal that it's hard to see progress in general, like the gender pay gap, much less how BPW advocacy has impacted. So often we'd be assessing by, if we've sent a letter to a Minister of Parliament, have we received a response, firstly? So we sent a letter recently about the need for abortion care providers to be well trained and supported in these specialist services. And we did receive a response where the Minister for Health talked about how they are fulfilling that requirement. So that is really helpful and helps inform our advocacy. But Yasmin, to answer your question, there's definitely work that could be happening in the space of tracking and recording the success rate of advocacy.
Thank you to both of you. I think that's an almost impossible one too, because we can never really finger on anything. It's a whole combination of things that changes the world. So we hope to contribute But maybe we have to let go of the results and just make sure that they continue to happen, or we continue to advocate. I want to also ask past International President, Dr. Sylvia Perry, do you have any comments that you'd like to make?
Yes, well, I've always held up New Zealand as the absolute perfection in doing advocacy. Their resolutions and that we've received at international have been superb. And in the UK here, our president isn't here today because she's on holiday, but in the UK, I think when we at the last Congress, General Assembly, when we presented something, we did some interaction with you, and that was very useful. We had a joint session, and we hold that up. We hold New Zealand very highly in regard. I've always complimented them on the work that's been done. Doesn't matter who the president is, they're all for it.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. I don't know if I
Totally.
mentioned in my presentation that how we have often won advocacy awards at congresses, but we certainly do love to talk about that as BPW New Zealand members. And I'm just so fortunate with BPW New Zealand that I've seen resolutions that I have personally helped craft, like gender equality in sports is a recent one that was passed at the 2021 Congress. That's little old me in New Zealand has been able to craft something that gets this level of profile. It's an amazing opportunity for women who are passionate about advocacy.
And can I come back and make one more further comment? I think that when we have the record of the resolutions circulated to us on the international board, it's not a case of we've got to encourage people not to just file them away, but really look to see, even if they come from another country, another region, which perhaps has slightly different context for the resolution in their country, find a way to do it and actually use it. It is our mandate, and we have not only the authority of the person who put that there, but we've got the authority of the whole international federation who've supported it and should be spreading it around the world.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sylvia. And when I was in New Zealand in early 2019, just pre-COVID days, when we could still travel, I saw that 75-page document of their almost 100 years of resolutions, and it's just astounding, just astounding. It's so awe-inspiring, really. Christine, I'd like to ask you if you'd like to make any comments. We have the president of BPW New Zealand in the room.
Thank you, Anne. I just want to congratulate Siobhan. It was an awesome presentation. And just to say that in the few years that she's been involved in issues here, we have actually presented quite a lot of documents, not just nationally, but she's done a lot of submissions to government, and it does grow the strength of our membership. And we definitely have that passion out there, and it does start from the grassroots. So you need to grow it in your clubs, because it's really, really important that they are looking at their issues, and they start locally. But a local issue tends to be a national issue that tends to then become, you look and you can see it globally. So yeah, really proud of the legacy that we have. I came into this as a membership person, but definitely am learning so much in the issues space, because it's important, and it is really important that we continue to grow that. So thank you for giving Siobhan the opportunity. We're certainly going to now that she's got that wonderful presentation sorted, I'm sure we can utilise that again somewhere. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And actually, you mentioned, Siobhan, and I'm going to ask people to just think about this while I call on someone else, and then I'll come back to you. But you mentioned about online submissions to your parliament. And I know in Korea, which is one of my former homes, I have many, as many of you know, but I spent some years in Korea, and they implemented just a few years ago an online petitioning program for their government. And if anybody starts any petition and gets 100,000 signatures, the government is required to take certain action. And so online, it's very easy to collect 100,000 signatures. Everyone passes it on social media and you very quickly get that actionable. And so I know that BPW Korea is using this. So I want to, in a minute, ask other people in the room if they're aware of any online functions in their countries that they can connect directly with their government or some other aspect of advocacy. But meantime, we have a current international board member with us. Diana, you would like to speak?
Yes, I am sorry my face doesn't show, but I am here with you and I follow every time I can. It's incredibly interesting webinars, and this is not less interesting. Even I'm very pleased to have attended this one because I think, and I want to congratulate the speaker because he was incredibly precise and thorough. And also I'd like to say that this is one of the essence of one of the core principles of our BPW International Organization. And by advocating, we are opening BPW to the world. We're showing ourselves. And that's so important. And I believe this is one of the things that should push us to advocate. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Absolutely agree. I spent a lot of years in my young adulthood more on the feminist side of marching in the street with placards and so on. And I'm not finished with that yet, but I think the world needs both side by side. We really need advocacy that's going directly to governments, and we need the visibility that activism brings. And both have strengths and different strengths. So for me, those are two sides of the same coin. So the advocacy work that BPW does, I think, is so critical. Who else do we have in the room who would like to make any comments? And including that question I raised a moment ago, which was, are any of the others of you aware of online ways that you can petition the government directly or speak to your parliament or any other digital opportunities for advocacy? Deneen, in the US. Deneen, what is you are currently on the national board, I know, but I've forgotten your position.
Yes, no, thank you. And again, apologies myself for being off camera. I am transitioning. It would have made everyone busy. But I currently am I'm entering my second term as the Vice President of Advocacy for National.
Okay, I thought so.
Siobhan, yes, thank you so much. That was extremely informative and enlightening. We do here in the States have something similar, where if you submit a petition and receive, I believe it's also 100,000 signatures, that there is required to be some type of response. I am hard pressed to think of, however, unfortunately, any issues that have really garnered much impact or effect through that mechanism. Our focus here for the past couple years in the US has been improving and increasing our digital advocacy. And so we had the great fortune of finding a digital platform that allows us to have our members send letters and phone calls and even video submissions to their members of Congress, their legislators, directly in response to campaigns that we see fit our advocacy platform, which is what we utilize as far as I believe you refer to as your policy. It's our platform. But it's very much the same story, right? It's always just finding ways to engage and educate and activate our membership and beyond. So I appreciate greatly the structure that you have, that process and that flow, and that actually just coincidentally happens to be one of my focus points this year for the US, is to firm up that structure so we do have that more consistent and predictable process for the issues that we're looking to speak to. Thanks so much for this.
Great, Deneen. And I'm going to come back to you in 6 months to 9 months time and have you do another advocacy webinar for us. So once you've worked out that structure, let me know when you're ready to present.
Absolutely. And I had a feeling, Anne. I just knew it was coming.
If you say it here, it will happen. You are committed. So we have another example then from Deneen in the US of a way to digitally reach your government, and that would be to maybe collate and broadcast to your membership across the board the ways that they can contact their legislators in their areas directly. And then when you have an issue that the club or federation has decided to take on board, to engage your membership, to get your army going and have them all be regularly contacting their legislators. And that's sort of a scattershot approach, but if it's focused on one issue, that can be very powerful. Anyone else before we go? Because we do like to maintain our time. We are busy women by definition. But anyone else want to make a comment or ask a question? We have time for 1 or 2 more at most. Okay. All right, then. We want to give one more very, very large and heartfelt thanks to our speaker today, Siobhan Dilly and BPW New Zealand. Obviously becoming a real expert on this after all the years you've spent now in this area. We really appreciate this. And you're coming from the Federation of Experts, of course, when it comes to advocacy. We all tip our hats, if we ever wore hats anymore, to BPW New Zealand when it comes to this issue. So, and as Diana brought up, this is one of the core tenets of BPW worldwide. So we all need to be paying close attention. Much thanks for everybody who is in the room. We always appreciate your attendance. This video, like all others, will go online on our YouTube channel within the next 24 hours. There are many more there, over 50 now, so you can check out the others and share them with your members. And we hope to see you in the room next month. Bye for now.